Our final segment concerns a possible major development in the conflict over abortion. The May 3rd political headline was powerful. Supreme Court has voted to overturn abortion rights, draft opinion shows. The tagline at the top of the article drove home the point. We hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled, Justice Alito writes in an initial majority draft circulated inside the court. It is no play on words to regard the headline, the story for which it is the harbinger, and the conditions that allowed the story to be published as unprecedented. Consider one of the conditions of the story, the last stage, the leak of the court. The case at issue is Thomas E. Dobbs, State Health Officer of the Mississippi Department of Health, et al., petitioners, v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, et al., or Dobbs for short. Apparently, for the first time ever, a draft Supreme Court opinion has been leaked to the public weeks before a decision is to be issued. While this is a draft opinion, and thus its relation to the final published decision is uncertain, it is a draft of a majority opinion. Thus, in order for the court to publish an entirely different decision, someone in the majority will have to become so unhappy with the logic of the emerging decision, or the language with which that emerging decision is conveyed, that they change their view from supporting the decision to opposing it. If that were to happen, the court would draw back from the draft decision and, rather than overturning Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, would uphold them. The draft decision does not whittle around the edges. A key part of the draft decision rejects a constitutional right to privacy. If this right is overturned, many other cases predicated on that right may come unmoored, including Griswold v. Connecticut, which established a right of married couples to obtain contraception, and Eisenstadt v. Baird, which extended that right to single persons. Consequently, the stakes involved could go considerably beyond abortion. That said, most analysts of the left and right are uncomfortable with at least some aspects of Roe v. Wade. Most notably, Roe is based in a right to privacy. Judge Alito's draft is right that the Roe decision offered a weakly justified basis for the privacy grounding of the decision, a feature of Roe with which many abortion rights proponents have difficulty. Commentators on Roe, such as Jack Balkin, have sometimes argued that Roe should have been based not in a right to privacy, but instead in a right to bodily integrity. A right to bodily integrity resonates with prohibitions on torture and cruel and unusual punishment. Not only that, a right to bodily integrity dovetails with the tradition of autonomy in medical matters, the same autonomy that allows individuals to refuse a vaccine even when doing so imperils the lives of others. In short, basing abortion law on a person's right to control their own body, rather than a person's right to make private decisions, would have lodged the decision in a much more powerful set of precedents and a much larger legal structure, undergirded by the Bill of Rights, treaties on human rights, and conventions in the conflict and conduct and treatment of war and prisoners of war. But Roe was not decided on the basis of bodily integrity. It is uncertain whether the reasoning would have mattered for the wider public, for sociologists and others have documented that in the late 20th century, the issue of abortion became intensely contentious. In Abortion and the Politics of Motherhood, Berkeley legal scholar and sociologist Kristen Luker explained the conflict by pointing, in part, to the changing status of women in the United States. One set of women were moving into higher education and more secure labor market positions, and for them, motherhood was one of many potentially meaningful roles they could occupy. In contrast, many other women were being left behind, as the nation's increasing and now accelerating inequality took hold. For these women, motherhood and children were the focal, non-negotiable source of meaning, and for these reasons, women's division in what abortion meant, and whether to support or close access to it, provides a key social basis for the conflict. Note that if Roe is overturned, the non-poor will have the resources needed to travel to obtain an abortion. The poor will be less able to do so. Thus, the impact of the decision will be felt more keenly by the poor, those with less education, less secure jobs, and more precarious conditions. What does the public think about that? When survey researchers for the General Social Survey asked respondents to say whether they, quote, think it should be possible for a pregnant woman to obtain a legal abortion if the family has very low income and cannot afford any more children, 49% of Americans said it should be possible for poor women to obtain an abortion. But two kinds of variation in patterns of answers are noteworthy. First, there is, as expected, large regional variation in the answers people gave. While 55% of residents in California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii, the Pacific Coast, thought poor women should have access to abortion, only 35% of residents in the west south central states of Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Arkansas thought so. Perhaps more surprising, in every region, the percentage of men equals or exceeds the percentage of women who support poor women's access to abortion. In the west north central states of the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, and Minnesota, the gender gap is 10 percentage points. 47% of men support poor women's access to abortion, but only 37% of women support poor women's access to abortion. The gap is even larger in the west south central states. 43% of men support poor women's abortion access, but only 28% of women do, a gap of 15 percentage points. The court appears poised to wade into abortion again and overturn 50 years of precedent. But might this be a classic case of generals fighting the last war, not the contemporary one? Pharmaceuticals promise the ability to take a pill and have a physically safe abortion in the privacy of one's own home. If clinically induced abortions are prohibited, this technology will substitute and bring increasing profits to companies. At the same time, it will bring isolation to some women. At the very time many, perhaps vulnerable people could benefit from a helping hand, this technology will support them physically, but it will not support them mentally or emotionally. In short, as pharmaceutical companies expand their market share, the social experience of an abortion will also change. If women seeking abortion pivot to pharmaceuticals in large numbers, expect authorities in some jurisdictions to try to deepen regulation of the market for pills designed and marketed to induce abortion. But where drugs are restricted, an underground market tends to emerge. If we've learned anything from the so-called war on drugs, drugs will win. Lucas argued that the battle over abortion is a battle about, among other things, whether the foundational laws of the nation will treat women's autonomy as equal to that of men's. Lucas also noted, however, that some see the conflict in a very different way, as a battle for the innocent unborn. At the time, she noted that abortion rights supporters and opponents shared so little in common that facts were irrelevant. A great deal has changed in the intervening years. We have different technology, more scientific knowledge, and much higher inequality. Despite these and other changes, little about the fundamental social basis of the conflict has changed. Some women are still fighting for equal recognition outside the home, while others are fighting for recognition by virtue of the home. Even as the leaked Alito majority draft opinion appears set to hand the win to half the country, it is still unclear whether these dynamics will lead one way or the other. One pretty obvious prediction, however, won't make the Supreme Court majority happy. Because the issue of abortion sits symbolically and materially at the center of a much wider social conflict about women's status in the home and in society, just as the abortion issue was not resolved by Roe, it will not be resolved by Dobbs. That's This Week in Sociological Perspective. We'll be back next week with another interview with an author of some important sociological research and more sociological insights on an issue in the news. Till then, take care.